Hi, this is Jim Isleib with MSU Extension. It's March 20th, and here we are in Munising in my yard. We're going to prune a few fruit trees today. We've got several hand tools here. I prefer to use all hand tools, no power equipment, just for safety's sake. Let's start with the most basic set of tools. But this equipment is sharp, and we'll start with the most basic pieces of pruning equipment. You want to have a decent set of hand shears, scissors type hand shears. This happens to be a set of Corona hand shears and a little carry holster. Now sometimes people want to use this type of anvil type pruning shear, but this is not really appropriate for pruning fruit trees. It's okay for other types of pruning, but this would leave a damaged cut. You want a nice clean cut. So we have a hand pruner. The next thing we want is a good set of lopping pruners. These are for larger diameter, 1/4 inch material with that hand pruner, and anything from 1/4 inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch. But you don't want to be trying to cut too big of things. Now this is a basic lopping pruner. I have a couple of other lopping pruners. This one is a heftier one. It has some leverage, and it also has handles that can be extended for longer reach. So that's a real nice tool. It's a little bit more than basic. Very nice tool. And I also have a really beastie hand pruner. These are Garrett White tools, these big ones. And this one is geared so that it can cut through stuff up to 1 inch thick. And it's a kind of a heavy, awkward thing, but it can be very handy sometimes. And it also has extending handles. Now, so we have the hand shear, the lopping shear, and then we need some good hand saws. This is a real nice one. This is a Baco hand saw. And what I especially like about this is you can loosen that blade, and you can adjust the angle of the blade in case you're in an awkward position and you need to saw at an angle. So this is, again, a little more than the basic saw. But if you have lots of trees, or you're really getting into pruning your fruit trees, that's a good tool to have. These are more basic saws. This is a one from the local hardware. It is just a standard pruning saw. It can be attached to a pole. This is the pole that this saw would fit into. It just snaps in place. And then you can adjust the length of the pole pruner and make it quite long. So you can reach a long way, but that's a very flexible pole, and it's hard to cut things at that length. It's much easier, really, to get up on a safe ladder and use a hand saw. Here's another pruning saw. I got this one at a thrift store for a couple of dollars. Took it to a saw sharpener locally here in Marquette area. Had it sharpened up for $5 maybe, and I got a real nice saw. Now this will cut on both sides, so it's very convenient. And when I'm climbing around in a tree or on a ladder, I like to have a saw handy in my back pocket, just a folding saw for small cuts, but maybe too big for a hand shear or lop. It's important to keep your hand tools clean, sharp, and disinfected. It's a good idea to disinfect your cutting tools between each tree if the trees appear to be healthy and you don't know of any disease problems. And you can fix up your own disinfecting solution with inexpensive, unscented bleach at about a 10-to-1 ratio of 1 part bleach, 10 parts water. Put it in a bucket. When you finish with one tree that appears to be healthy, simply disinfect your cutting shears and other tools by dunking them in that bleach, making sure it's well covered, and then you can move on to the next tree. If there has been evidence of disease in trees, then you want to disinfect between cuts on those trees. For example, fire blight in apples or pears. That's a little inconvenient, but by cutting tissue in that tree and then without disinfecting going and making another cut in that tree, you can actually move that bacteria or fungal disease from one part of the tree to another. Black knot in plum or cherry is another example like that. So with healthy trees, disinfect between trees. With trees that you know have a disease problem, disinfect between cuts. This tool here is a pole pruner. It is an extendable pruner. You can stand on the ground and reach up into a tree, probably maybe 12 feet or so, 14 feet from the ground. It really has a long extension. It's a very, very handy tool, one that I use frequently, use it a lot in spring pruning and any mid-season pruning up in the top of a tree when it's just a lot more convenient than getting out a ladder and climbing up. Now you do give up some precision. You can't do as neat a job, not as good a job as you could on a ladder close up with hand pruners or lops. But what you lack in precision, you can really make up for in convenience. This is not an inexpensive tool. I've had it for probably 15 years, and I think I paid about $80 or $85 for it then. The last piece of equipment that I want to show you is a homemade orchard ladder. The difference between an orchard ladder and a regular step ladder is that an orchard ladder is a tripod. It has 3 legs, makes it much more stable on uneven ground. This one is made out of 1x4 lumber. I got the plans for it out of an old farm carpentry book, and I'd be happy to provide anyone that wants a set of those plans. It didn't cost very much to make. I think I spent about $25 on the wood and on the screws and hardware. Some of the hardware I had to make myself. I had some bar stock for these braces that you see here, and I had a piece of toe strap for this strap that keeps it from extending too far. And I've used it for years now, never had any trouble with feeling like it was going to fall apart or break. And I'm not a lightweight guy, so it's been a very handy tool. Not real tall. I mean, you don't get way up into a tree, but for a semi-dwarf tree, if you have tools especially that extend a little, you can get wherever you need to be. Well, let's look at pruning a few trees. My rule of thumb is when the snow, when about half of the ground is free of snow, that's an ideal time for most people to be pruning. Now you can prune all through the winter months as soon as the trees become fully dormant, probably in December. But for most hobbyists and homeowners that don't have that many trees, I suggest that people wait to the end of March or the beginning of April. You want to avoid pruning after the buds start to swell because you damage a lot of buds by pulling wood out of the tree. Now, as I mentioned, the first thing we're going to do is disinfect our tool. All the trees in my yard are cared for. They get watered, they get sprayed, and they get pruned every year. So these are not overgrown, neglected trees. These are trees that are undergoing annual pruning. So that's a little different from some people are interested in renovating an old abandoned tree, and that's not what we're doing here. We're taking care of trees that are pretty well in good shape. This tree is only 2 years old. It has not borne an apple yet. It's a Cortland apple tree. And what we're trying to do is train this tree. When we plant the tree, this was a bare root fruit tree, so we plant the tree, and you can see right here, this is where I whipped this tree. I cut off all the branches and I cut the plant right back to here. That's what you do when you first plant a bare root tree up to a basal caliper of 5/8 of an inch or so, not bigger than that. If it's bigger than that, you probably don't want to cut all the limbs off, but most bare root trees that you buy, you'll want to whip them. Then that first year, it grew some branches, and I pruned those branches back. So this is, what you see here is the results of the second year of growth. And I want, if I can, I want to have a set of so-called scaffold branches down low, and then I want a bare space on the trunk of 18 inches or 2 feet, and then I want to develop a second set of scaffold branches on top. These ones were brand new branches that grew last year. I'm going to keep some of them for scaffolds, and I'm going to cut some of the extraneous stuff off of these lower scaffolds in an effort to train this tree to have the shape that we want. We want a lower set of branches. That's where most of the fruit will be born in the future. And then we want a space and an upper set. Why do we want a space? We want a space so that sunlight can penetrate, so we don't have too dense of a plant when we're done. And this is a semi-dwarf tree, so it's not going to get real tall anyway. So let's see. This branch I don't like much because it's growing off to the side. We're taking that one out. These others, I'm inclined to leave them, except maybe not this one. Well, you know, one thing about pruning is you can always change your mind next year and take something out that you left this year. So I'm going to leave this branch as it is for now. Then we'll work on this other lower branch here. And I'm just going to keep this one. It's growing up at an angle. You should note that any wood that's growing straight up vertical is probably should be considered take it out, because it won't flower or bear fruit. And we don't want any competition with this central leader. And for that purpose, I may just take part of this one right off and try to encourage this to keep growing out at an angle. Okay, I'm piling up my cuttings so I can pick them up later. We want to dispose of any prunings as soon as we can. Either burn them, take them to a city brush pile, which is what I'll do, or bury them. But you don't want them laying around because they can be a source of disease and insect trouble. Okay, now we got a decision to make. Which of these branches do I want to keep for scaffold branches for this second scaffold up here? I kind of like this one. We're looking for a 45-degree angle. That's a nice angle on this branch here. This is a nice angle too, and we also want some space between these branches. We don't want them growing out of the same place on the trunk, because that's a structural weakness in the plant. So let's keep this one, and let's keep this one. 4 is my magic number, so this one grows out this way, this one grows out this way, this one grows out that way, and this one grows out that way. So I'm going to keep those 4, and I'm going to take off these 2. So now we have another set of scaffold branches started up. I'm not going to tip any of these branches, I'm just going to let them be. If we do tip them, it will stimulate more growth on those branches. We're going to want these to branch out a little bit, and I think that's good enough for this tree. And now, since we're done with this one, we're going to disinfect. I like to start at the bottom of the trees when I'm doing pruning at home here. That way it opens up the bottom so that I can get in closer to the trunk and reach up into the top. One thing I'll mention is that we get a lot of snow here in Munising, 180 inches on average, 200 inches. We've had as much as 280 inches. So we get a lot of snow. This has been a very unusual year. We usually have snow up to my belt this time of the year. And with that in mind, I like to select my first scaffold branches on the lower scaffold somewhere above belt high, maybe a little bit below that, but not very much. You can see the first branch here is that high. The reason for that is when the snow melts up, it ices up and gets cold at night, warmer in the day, it'll tear those lower branches right off as that snow melts and settles. And I've had that happen. So further south, even further south in the Upper Peninsula, you could select your first branch at a lower height than this tree. But I'm gonna be thinking about that low branch there. You can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I really have 5 lower scaffold branches on this tree. And I'm going to take that bottom one off just because I think 4 scaffold branches is an adequate number. And anything else, the tree starts to get too cluttered up, too full. So I have taken that one off. I used pruning lops on that because it was a bigger size branch and good for the lop. So now I just start working around. Anything that grows straight up or anything that grows straight down out of a branch can come off. And anything that crosses, this little piece here crosses over. Branches that get too long, the fruit tends to droop down, becomes difficult to mow. This is my yard at my home, so anything that's an obstacle to easy mowing, that's a consideration that's different at home than it would be in an orchard. So I like to shorten up my limbs a little bit. I'm taking this one off, so So now I've done what I want to on that particular branch. Now this one, I'm going to take this off and just keep the one that's pointing up a bit. This one's growing straight up, so it's coming off. Now you can see that this here branch is probably going to cross if it gets full of fruit. So I'm taking that one off. Like I said before, you can always take a branch off next year. You can't put one back on, so go easy. There's no point in getting too aggressive. Anything that's underneath, if it's a branch directly underneath another branch, that should come off. Because the fruit is only going to be of good quality where it gets full sun, where it's not shaded. So this branch is in pretty good shape now. I don't like this little branch. It's right on the inside of the tree. I'd rather not. I'd rather have that tree open. When I make a cut, I try to have the cutting side of this scissors type pruning shear inward toward the main wood. Makes a cleaner cut. You notice I'm not taking off this little stuff. I'll leave that on there for now. When it gets bigger, I'll probably take it off. This one here, you can see it grew up and it's growing straight up. This is all new growth from last year. That's got to go. I would consider that almost like a water sprout. A water sprout is a branch that comes off the trunk of a tree and grows straight up. And they make great pruning wood, but they're not much good for the structure of the tree in general. And let's take a look at this branch here. This one is getting pretty long. I'm going to cut off the end of it and just keep that part. I'll cut off this part that's growing upwards, and I'll keep the rest. This branch here, I kind of like this branch, but I don't like this Y-shaped divide. I'm going to just keep one of those. And this is also getting over into this other wood. You want to avoid wood that grows into other wood and get that out of there. So that's good enough for that lower branch. And this final lower scaffold branch, now here's a little piece I am going to take out. It's in a funny position and it's got to go. So we're cutting this one out because it's going to be in the way. We'll leave this little stub right here. It looks like it's got fruiting buds on it and it'll make some apples, so we'll leave that for this year. But I'm cutting these things that grow down. I'm cutting these things that grow straight up. Any branches that are too close together, you don't want the plant to get too dense with growth. So I like to try to just keep it thinned out reasonably. Okay, now here at the end of this branch, we got a decision to make. What do we want to keep? I'm going to keep a few of these buds because I think they'll make apples. Can always take them off next year. This piece is growing straight up. It's coming off. And I want this to keep the part that's growing outward so we don't get too much growth here. We want light penetration into these lower branches. Anything that's in the way, we'll take off. Okay, so we've taken care of the lower scaffold. Now let's work on the upper scaffold branches. Again, we want this tree to be thin enough so that light penetrates. We don't want any branches that are growing directly under another branch, so this one here is going to go. And also this one. I don't want branches that are growing straight up, so this one's coming off. And I really don't want anything competing with that central leader, getting too tall, growing straight up, so I'm taking that off. There's our first lower scaffold branch. This one here, I don't like. It's growing up into that other branch. I'm going to keep this one. That's a nice looking branch. Well, let me think about that, because we got a branch right underneath it. I guess I don't want to keep that one. Here's the one that's growing straight up. This one is growing underneath. But hey, it's your tree. You make the decision. I'm going to keep this little branch because I think it's going to make some apples. This one's getting kind of long. I'm going to cut it back a bit. Same with this one. All right. Now we only have 3 branches really in this second scaffold, and you can see this one looks pretty good. I'm taking this one off because it's growing down. I'm taking this one off because it's growing up, although I'm going to keep what appears to be a fruiting bud there just so it'll make an apple or two. Now this tree is 5 years old and it's got a well-established form. Pretty, not bad looking. It's got a lower set of scaffolds. It's got this next set of scaffolds. And that's about as tall as I would really like this tree to get. So I'm thinking I'll have a kind of a small third scaffold up there, and that'll be the end of it. Okay, here's the orchard ladder. And when I set it up, I'm looking for a spot where I can extend this tripod and get the ladder set up so I feel confident that I can climb up without any danger of tipping over. Okay, now before I climb the ladder, I want to make sure I've got my tools that I need. And all I'm going to need for that small wood is my hand shear. So up I go. Important to be as safe as you can. Okay, so what do we got here? We got some wood that's unnecessary. I want anything that's growing vertically up here removed. Anything that's stringy looking or growing out too much, I want removed. Anything that's growing underneath another branch. Okay. So what do I got now? I got this little beginnings of a scaffold branch, which I'm going to leave for now. I may take it out in a future year. I like this one. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is way too many. So let's take some of this out of here. I'm taking out this one just to leave a little more vertical space on the trunk between branches. I think I'll take out this one. So now I'm down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, let's see. I really don't want a lot of wood up at the top of the tree, so I'm going to take this one off. And that leaves me with the beginnings of my final set of branches up at the top. And we're done with this tree. Just simply disinfect this cutter and that pruning lop that I used before, and we'll move on to a larger tree. This is a red barren apple tree, one that I grafted myself and planted over here in 2002, so it's 19 years old. The red barren has been a productive apple. It tends to bear fruit every other year. It's not my favorite, but it is a reasonably good tree. It may bear fruit every other year because I've pruned it pretty hard, and you can affect how the tree flowers and bears fruit by your pruning habits. Pruning stimulates a lot of growth. When the tree is concentrating on vegetative growth, it tends to not flower very much or produce much fruit. So this tree produces a lot of apples every second year. And again, I'm going to start with the lower scaffold branches and work my way around. You can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 big scaffold branches. This tree has developed a lot of low limbs. Now, as I mentioned before, the trees tend to produce the most fruit on the lower limbs, so you hate to take off too much. But this one here is kind of in my way, and this tree is on the edge of a vegetable garden patch, and it does shade things a bit. I don't have a lot of room here in the city of Munising where I live. I may just take out that branch, and in order to do that I need to use a saw. When you make a cut on a big branch, you'll find that there is a collar area on the tree. You can see it looks kind of different, and you want to make your cut so that you're just barely touching into the outside of that collar area, and that way the tree will heal up good. Don't cut right flush with the limb, or the tree will not be able to scar over. It forms callus tissue from that collar area. So there's a pretty big chunk of wood removed. Let's see, while I got my saw out, is there anything else I want to cut off with the saw while I've got it handy in my hand? We want to remove vertical growth, stuff that's growing straight up, and also stuff that's growing straight down. We want to remove anything that's crossing or that's growing directly underneath another branch. Anything broken or diseased, or anything that's inconvenient for us to get access up into the tree. We also want to remove anything that's going to be inconvenient as we work around the tree, things that are going to be poking you in the face, etc. We want to thin the branches to reduce shading and encourage good fruit ripening. Remove any crossing branches, anything growing into the center of the tree. Don't agonize or overthink. Just get a mental image of what you want the tree to look like and stick with it. By the time a tree is this size, its structure is pretty well set. What you're really doing here is maintenance pruning, which is needed annually. Too heavy a pruning can result in too much vegetative growth and poor fruiting the following year. If you prune too light, you may have too much fruit set, with resulting small apples, shaded apples that don't ripen very well. All right, I've cleaned up and thinned out that lower scaffold quite a lot. Now we're going to work on the upper scaffold. It's a time saver to go around the tree and take out the larger cuts right at first, so you're not doing a lot of small pruning and then going back and changing your mind and taking out a whole limb. I'm going to use the extending pole pruner just so you get a look at how it works. I want to shorten up this branch here, so I'll find a convenient place to slide through with the pole pruner. And you have to get a purchase on this sliding handle, and it pulls it right down. And you'll want to be sure that that cutting finds its way to the ground so that you can dispose of it later. I'm trying to reduce shade from the top of this tree so that sunlight will penetrate. That will enhance fruit ripening and quality. We use the same basic ideas for selecting branches to keep and those that need to be removed. I'll manage the tree height by removing vertical growth up at the top back to a convenient horizontal side branch. I want to set my ladder up close to the trunk as possible, making sure that it is safe and secure. I like to remove branches that inhibit access up into the tree, both for current access and access in future years. I want the tree to be fairly open. I try to be strategic with ladder placement to maximize my reach without having to move the ladder too frequently. And I try to remember to keep my folding saw in my pocket. An early spray program can control scab if your apples are always scabby. Use a fungicide like Captan and apply that right after the flower petals all drop off. And then again 10 days and maybe a third spray after another 10 days. That can greatly reduce scab trouble. If you want to control insects, you can use an organic product like Surround Wettable Powder, which is kale and clay. You can also use a home fruit spray. And we'll take this right here. If we can get in there. Nice. Okay, now I'm satisfied. Here's our red barren apple tree before pruning, and here it is when we're finished. This is a green gauge plum tree. It's been in the ground about 12 years. Hasn't been real productive, but it has started to bear plums in the last couple of years. I've tried to train this one into more of an open center. I took out the central leader early on and trained some branches to come out. This tree is a little bit dense in the middle, and I'm going to take some big branches out. And we'll use a little time-lapse photography to speed this up. I'll start by taking out 1 or 2 larger branches, and then we'll go from there. First, I want to disinfect those tools I used last time, because this tree does have some black knot on it. With that black knot disease in mind, I'm going to want to disinfect my tools between cuts. Okay, we'll start by taking out this large. Again, I'm trying to stay right at the outside edge of that collar so that it'll heal up well. MSU does not recommend painting tree wounds after doing big prunes like that. Okay, a little disinfecting. And then I'm going to take out another large limb. Well, my battery ran out in the middle of pruning this plum tree. But you can see that I thinned it out a lot, opened up the center. Now the sunlight's going to be able to penetrate inside and ripen fruit. It's looking pretty good. This one here is probably my favorite tree in the whole yard. It's a Zestar apple. Very productive. Every year it bears lots of fruits. Beautiful fruit, early maturing, and very tasty. I really like this Zestar apple. These are a couple of pear trees. This one here is a Bartlett pear. It's pretty much of an industry standard. Very productive tree, makes a lot of nice pears. We put them up, can them in pint jars every year. And back behind me is a Warren pear tree. A little bit less common, but supposed to be a very tasty pear. It's just starting to bear fruit. Had a few pears last year. These 3 apple trees are crowded back here in the back, tighter than they should be. The first one on the left is a Jana Gold, the middle one is a Gala, and the one on the far right is a Sweet 16 apple. They were shaded for several years by a big maple tree that was removed maybe 5 years ago, and so they're starting to do better now. Thanks for joining me today for a little fruit tree pruning. Growing tree fruit can be a rewarding hobby, even if you live in town. You don't have to go as hog wild as I do in my yard, but you can grow apples, pears, plums, tart cherries, and really have a good time doing it, and I'd encourage you to give it a try. If you'd like more information, I do prepare a handout for pruning demonstrations, update that every spring, and I'd be happy to send you a copy of that electronically. Just email me at this address. And that's all for today from Munising, Michigan. This is Jim Isleib with MSU Extension.